19 October 1986, Maputo Airport. Mozambique's 53-year-old, charismatic, revolutionary leader Samora Machel prepares to board his Russian-made Tupolev 134 jetliner. A few kilometers away, South African exile and Radio Mozambique English service journalist Den Moyane is consoling himself, having missed out on an exciting assignment, covering the president's attendance of a regional summit in Lusaka, Zambia.
I packed on the day before. On the day we were supposed to leave a few hours before. Had a meal with my wife, and I was waiting for my editor, Ian Chris, to come and pick me up and take me drive me to the airport, and leave me there. And then he arrives. Just before he arrives, he calls me, says, "I'm sorry, President wants another advisor on the plane, so you can't go." So it was easy to take me off the plane than to take off the reporter for the national broadcaster. Yeah. So in that way, I miss being on that flight.
Moyane is particularly disappointed as he has come to admire President Machel's hands-on leadership style, as well as his orchestra conductor-like public oratory.
He had this capacity to speak and speak without stopping, and with Portuguese, and using words and turning them and making his point. He'll realize that the one corner of the crowd is becoming restless, and then he'll stop, and then he'll start singing, "O povo organizado." Said we need an organized people, be disciplined.
No one could have imagined then that this leader with a zest for life would be returning home in a coffin, under circumstances that would shatter a nation and remain shrouded in mystery for decades. In the controversial subsequent investigation led by Judge Cecil Mago and in probes thereafter, the key question has been why Machel's plane made a premature 37-degree turn to the right after entering Mozambican airspace. That turn set it on course for a crash on the Libombo Mountains inside South African territory. Mago's commission would conclude controversially that the crash was caused by human error, a conclusion that rested in part on the findings of air safety expert Dr. Alan Deal, who assisted the investigation on behalf of the U.S. State Department.
I'm what's called a human factors specialist, and I look at the ergonomics of the cockpit arrangement, and it was very poor. The lighting was poor. It was some of the displays that depicted the frequency of the radio receivers were hard to read.
But Deal's most damning findings were against the immensely experienced 5-member Russian crew, who appeared to have committed a series of mistakes and may have been downright negligent. The co-pilot, for example, whose task it was to select the frequency for the Maputo airport guiding beacon, was said to have been distracted, listening to a Russian entertainment program.
Basically, what may have happened, what appeared to happen, is that he selected the Masapa frequency, which I recall was the last digit was a 7. When he instead of selecting the 7, he selected the numeral 3, which was the beacon that was located not at Maputo, where he intended to go, but Masapa, which was an airport over the South African border in Swaziland. So it was, and the digits, the nomenclature, the 7s and 3s look very similar, and in poor lighting, it might have been difficult for him to know or to recognize that he selected the wrong frequency.
Deal also found the crew ignored several navigational aids, including radar and the ground proximity warning system, which could have helped them avert the crash.
President Machel's death can be in no one's interest in Southern Africa. He was a great leader of Africa, and whatever our differences, he's passing away. It's a very great shock to all of us.
But not many outside apartheid South Africa's establishment were buying it.
We do have evidence by people who were there that just a few minutes after the crash, the crash of the plane, South African military forces were at the scene. So they knew. They knew. That's why we can't accept that it was just an accident.
There's no smoking gun here. I mean, to our frustration, there is no smoking gun. We cannot yet say, I cannot yet say what is going on. What we do know is that the South African Defence Force, the South African regime, had motive to kill him. They had the means to kill him. And we know that there were troops on the ground. So the behavior immediately after was very suspicious. Judge Margot was not a very credible judge. He had done previous investigations like this, and it was a whitewash.
That flight was on its path according to the beacon that guides it. We learned at the time that you can change the frequency of a beacon. You can clone a beacon. So if it's on frequency A, you can clone that frequency, take another beacon, put it somewhere else. When you are flying, apparently the pilots, after they've spoken to the control tower, they then hook onto a particular beacon frequency to guide the plane on the right path. Now, if you have two beacons with the same frequency, and one can be made stronger in terms of the signal strength, you can pull the plane there.
The theory that the pilots were led astray by a decoy mobile beacon placed in the vicinity of the Libombo Mountains was advanced very early on in the investigation by the Russians, but may be easy to dismiss as a far-fetched conspiracy theory. But consider what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission found in its investigation of the erstwhile Civil Cooperation Bureau.
When we spoke to people who had formerly been involved with the Portuguese intelligence agency, the PID, I spoke to one particular agent of the PID, and he indicated to us in an interview that the military in South Africa had a structure which had created a beacon which had taken the plane in which Samora Machel, President Samora Machel, was traveling off course.
A guy called Marcus, I think Jorge Marques, he was a former Portuguese operative. He is the one who said they got an order from Joe Fester, who was a commander of I think it was called Region 4, Mozambique, Region 4 of the CCB, areas of investigations and operation, and by General Joubert, who was in the army. He told us that part of their instruction was for them to create a false beacon which could be mounted even at the back of a military vehicle.
In 2008, a former CCB member serving time in prison, Hans Lowe, confessed to having been part of a plot to down Machel's plane in Mbuzini. But if that's not enough, consider US investigator Alan Dill's account of a meeting he held just before leaving South Africa in 1986 with a senior Civil Aviation Authority official. The subject matter: the Civil Aviation Authority's own mobile beacon.
Well, the question is, where was your mobile beacon that night? Because clearly we know that could have been used theoretically to deceive the Russian crew. And I could tell that this official was very nervous, but I'd worked with him for a couple, 3 weeks, and I think he trusted my discretion, and he admitted that the beacon was actually in the hands of the South African police the night of the accident.
According to Deal's account, the Civil Aviation Authority's beacon was impounded by the police the night before the accident.
Apparently, this is what he was told, that the truck transporting that beacon had defective lights, okay, and they were transporting it at night. A police car came up, told the driver of the civil aviation truck that he had to take the truck and the beacon into a police impound lot, and it stayed there for several days during the time when as far as this official knew, during the time that the accident occurred. And I thought that was very suspicious.
Significantly, Dill's conviction that human error was the primary cause of the crash has been shaken. Where do you stand now? Are you settled in your mind whether this was an accident caused by human error or it was a deliberate act?
Well, I simply don't know. I think that the main thing that needs to occur is a reopening of the investigation, and I have suggested that the United Nations should lead this effort. It's not that I accuse the Zuma government of any incompetence or continued cover-up. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I'm simply saying we need an independent investigation to answer that question about the phony radio beacon versus the pilot error theory.
The Mago Commission, to a large extent, my understanding is that they depended on your inputs to arrive at the conclusion that it was a human error that was largely responsible. So you saying this is actually quite significant. Do you agree?
Well, I agree. It certainly appeared on the surface to be a human error accident. And of course, yes, I believe the commission did rely, since I was the specialist, I'm an aviation psychologist and a cockpit designer, and I had the expertise to make these conclusions. But it was only, as I said, right before I left South Africa that I learned that the police were in possession of a mobile radio beacon, which theoretically could have been used to deceive the crew.
So if the investigator whose human factors findings informed the conclusion of the only full-scale investigation ever conducted into this crash has his doubts, the issue is far from settled. South African government undertakings to investigate, going as far back as 1999, are yet to materialize.
What happened to the report that we handed to the Department of Justice with clear recommendations that there are people that ought this investigation can be completed, and there are certain people who must be investigated, who must be interrogated, and if needs be, they must be charged.
There needs to be political will in SADC. Number one, we need to find out everybody who was in the chain of command of the CCB, of the Civil Cooperation Bureau, needs to be interrogated. And that starts with Joe Verster, and it starts with his commanding officer, General Joop Joubert.
History wants to know what happened to this spectacular Southern African president. And we are reluctant. We do other little things with our investigative powers, like charge the Minister of Finance.
People of Southern Africa are certainly entitled to know the truth of what happened to Samora Machel. And I would think the widow in particular, Graça, would definitely welcome such an in-depth, sincere, objective effort.
To be fair to the South African government post-94, under Nelson Mandela, they committed to looking further into it, that there will be attempts to look further into it. But as you said, nothing has come out of that. And I think there were also requests under the Thabo Mbeki administration to do the same. And my understanding is that also those have continued even under the Zuma administration. Now, exactly why it's not proceeding, I can't answer that. But I think it's important to come to a conclusion on what actually happened.
Thulasizwe Simelane, Johannesburg.